Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday, the 25th of August, 2026. Yesterday, we did a show with the writer and singer-songwriter David Baerwald. His book, which is a novel, The Fire Agents, doing very well. It's based loosely on the life of his grandfather, Ernst Baerwald, and his exploits, rather controversial exploits, during the Second World War. In Japan. My guest today also has a grandfather who was involved in the Second World War and also has a new book out which connects with her grandfather. Katie S. Sanders is a Boston-based writer, journalist, thinker, and her grandfather, a man called Murray Simon, was a very brave fellow involved in the OSS and was captured in France. And part of the story of Katie's new book, which she co-authored with Nicholas Reynolds, Ortiz's War, connects with her grandfather, Murray Simon. And I'm thrilled that Katie is joining us from her home in Brookline, Massachusetts. Katie, congratulations on the book. It's out today. The remarkable true story of the OSS saboteur, Peter J. Ortiz. Before we get to Ortiz, tell me about your grandfather.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I should note that it's also the anniversary of the liberation of Paris. August 25th is a day of celebration in the context of World War II history as well. So glad to be here. I never knew my grandfather, but I actually, he died before I was born. Peter Ortiz also died before I was born. But I can see that behind me in this frame is a picture of the plane that my grandfather was piloting when he was shot down a month before D-Day. And, he was a 23-year-old United States Army Air Force pilot, a Jewish American kid from Queens who certainly never been on a plane until he learned to fly one in this, really horrific global conflict. And when he found himself shot down in France, he was on an OSS mission, the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA. And he had been told, if you get shot down, you might be captured and tortured as a spy and killed, not funneled as a prisoner of war. So the advice was don't get shot down. Obviously, he makes it back. And that's sort of the story that I set out to tell with Nick in Ortiz's War, of part of the story of who helps him get back and then the life of that American hero.
You mentioned Nick, Colonel Nicholas E. Reynolds, another CIA officer, a very distinguished writer, military figure. Was this book his idea or your idea? Who came to it first?
I like to say I convinced him that it should be done, and then we embarked on it together. Nick is certainly was in no need of a co-author in the sense that he is a military historian, an Oxford minted PhD, and a true biographer who wrote a Hemingway biography called Writer, Sailor, Soldier, Spy. That was, on my radar before I knew him. But really, I connected to Nick over our mutual interest in Peter Ortiz. We both sort of just couldn't stop wondering why more people didn't know the story of this American hero. And so we kind of, let's say eventually I convinced him and then we came to it together. So I guess I can take credit.
So I have to admit, I'd never heard of Peter J. Ortiz, but he's a remarkable character on lots of fronts. Mm-hmm. He has his own Wikipedia page, although he's not that well known. I think your book's going to make him much better known, a U.S. Marine Corps colonel. One of the astonishing things about him is after the war, he had a small career in Hollywood, playing, in a sense, himself. Tell me about this Ortiz character. What's so remarkable about him?
Yeah, well, the picture you just showed of him with John Ford, you'd think that John Ford would have made him famous, not, a book many, many years later, or there have been articles about him too. I would have never heard of Peter Ortiz had my grandfather not been basically smuggled to him and intercepted by him in the middle of Nazi-occupied France. But that was really back in 1944. Peter Ortiz was doing what Peter Ortiz did best, which was coming to the aid of very vulnerable people and fighting fascism in ways that really Nick hates it when I say this, but there's a very Inglourious Bastard-esque quality about Peter Ortiz. I'd say much classier and more, righteous in the line of the rules of war. But Peter Ortiz was a, sort of an American blue blood. He was born to the editor of Paris Vogue, one of the founding editors, publisher Felipe Ortiz, and his mother as well. Like, they're kind of, you'd call it aristocratic background, but he's also sort of a third culture kid where he, his dad was working in Paris. Parents were divorced. He went to French boarding school and didn't want to be in fancy French boarding school, ran away, joined the rough and tough French Foreign Legion, which again, I wasn't particularly familiar with until I started learning about Ortiz. But this kid who was sort of born in New York City, couldn't sit still in the classroom, and rejected a lot of the things that, his, the fancy upper echelon of society father was trying to impose on him, ends up becoming really one of the greatest World War II heroes of the, 21st century, the 20th century. And he really rises into, his full-on hero mode in World War II. And again, lucky for me, my grandfather was one of many people that Peter Ortiz rescued. There's a town in France that celebrates him every year, and what he did in France to help spare their town from Nazi annihilation. So say the short answer is he's a hero. And then after the war, his OSS pal, John Ford, was obviously big in Hollywood. He played minor roles in a bunch of John Ford films, sometimes, wearing his real uniforms. But he had also been working for a spy organization, so it wasn't as though he was going around revealing his activity. So it's been fun to piece together and learn about what he did, especially in this moment in history.
This moment in history, what do you mean, Katie? Are we crying out now for heroes like Ortiz, unambiguous heroes? What do you mean by this moment in history?
I mean, I'd say society is always crying out for heroes, or that we're better with heroes, and that I find it tricky now because there's, so much emphasis on people telling their own stories and bragging in ways that Peter Ortiz would never have had social media. He certainly wasn't going to be flashing his, resume anywhere. But I mean, in a moment when, democracy, is increasingly under threat. Ever since learning my grandfather's story and connecting to my family history, but also just, 20th century history in general, and the largest global conflict of, human history that we have documented being World War II, I have gone through a lot of, exhibits, be it a Holocaust museum or an Imperial War Museum. And I find that, when you start in 1933 and Hitler comes to power and it's like, ooh, this isn't great. But in hindsight, it's easier to see. And then you get to 1936 and you're like, oh, the Olympics are canceled. Like, but okay, it's still, okay over here. And so I think right now, I certainly hope we're not in 1939. But I also think that a lot of the dangerous confluences of both political power and international relations and economics and geopolitics does make for a particularly threatening time, and that Peter Ortiz was someone who was not okay standing back while his neighbors were under threat. He was, as his son would tell you, he had this the family motto of Noblesse, oblige, like nobility obligates. He had a lot of privilege, I think, but also, in a very Spider-Man way, felt that that was a real responsibility to do the right thing. And that's something that echoed through his actions, especially in World War II, but also really for the remainder of his life to, feel. So yes, I think the world would be much better if we had people who are compelled to do what they felt was, not only the noble thing to do, but the thing with regard for other human lives, even before your own.
It's interesting you bring up Spider-Man. I saw the movie, or the latest Spider-Man movie, tried to get into the head of a young Spider-Man. You also mentioned Noblesse oblige. This man was, Ortiz was, as you note, from a very privileged background, for better or worse. I don't think that necessarily implies bad things. He spoke 10 languages, as you say. He was a rebel. He ran away to the French Legion, which is what upper-class rebels did in the 1930s. Have you tried to get into his head? I'm sure you have in Ortiz's War, Katie. What's it like in Ortiz's? You write about Ortiz's War, but what's his head like? Is it more or less complicated by this sense of noblesse oblige? Did he think a lot, or not very much? Does that excessive or maybe scarcity of thinking, does that explain his heroism in the Second World War?
It's a really interesting question, because you're looking at someone, and by the way, we have come to conclude that he spoke closer to 5 languages. So history and Wikipedia like to have a little bit of hyperbole. I know. I've never edited it. I don't want to, make this my first Wikipedia edit. But and you could get by. Nick, the historian, would say, well, his Arabic wasn't fluent. He didn't call it fluent. I'm like, Nick, he spoke Arabic. But so I'll give him 5. And again, as someone who speaks 1 and change, Ortiz was really brilliant. He was a thinker, but he wasn't necessarily a warrior. I would say he was more of a warrior, and that he was very instinctually driven. I think if you look at the French Foreign Legion, the more I learned about the French Foreign Legion, the more I learned about the cloth he'd been cut from. But also, Nick made the parallel of, all right, a professional athlete, like to what it takes to become one. Not everybody is predisposed to being capable of being one, but then you really also have to have all these other ingredients. And I would say he sort of falls in this category of, I would say he is intellectual for sure. And again, he couldn't stay in school. He was quoted as not a good candidate for a desk job ever in a military file. And we found that to be very true. Very gravitationally pulled toward the eye of the storm is how I would describe Peter Ortiz. I don't know if you've seen the movie Free Solo or Alex Humboldt, that nothing to do with Peter Ortiz except that.
No, I haven't seen that movie.
Just this guy who, is opting to boulder with no harness. And I'm like, I'm a Jewish mother who cringes at the statement of that. But for Peter Ortiz, there's something, thrilling about that, or about walking into a bar in the middle of Nazi-occupied France in your Marine uniform. When you asked who Peter Ortiz was, I would also say he was a Marine in Europe in World War II, which in and of itself, people say, what? There were Marines in Europe in World War II? And because he was a secret agent, working for the OSS, it's even more niche. He was someone who was, again, very gravitationally pulled towards action, as he would say in a short autobiography, under 20 pages that he wrote after the war. I'm no peacetime soldier. And I think that sums it up well, too.
Yeah, when we think of the French Foreign Legion, of course, we think of North Africa, we think of Casablanca.
Yep. And he was there, too.
Right. And we think of these romantic, heroic soldiers like Peter Ortiz and their love of women. Did he have a rich, alongside his rich military heroic exploits, was he also a ladies' man? Was he quite, he's certainly a man of enormous physical appeal.
I was going to say, let's just look at the guy. This is a big blow up the publisher sent me behind me, and I don't mind having it here. I think what you see is what you get. We have the diary of his wife, who was, probably, she's about half his age. He wasn't married till after the war. He certainly had women, like his son had a silver flask that was engraved from a lady friend. I think he was very gentlemanly, though. I've heard no stories about anything but him, really being a class act. And so I think again, look at the guy. I don't think women were an issue. His wife, Jean Ortiz, who he courted when she was 17 or 18, and he was in his 30s. This war hero had been courted by Frank Sinatra and others, and was incredibly beautiful. And they got married on Valentine's Day. They eloped in Vegas in the late 1940s.
So coming back to that question about thinking too much or too little, I mean, he clearly was a remarkably brave man. He put his life on the line many times.
Yeah.
What do we learn about bravery then, leaving aside the peculiarities of Ortiz's own life?
Yeah.
What lessons does this new book out today, Ortiz's War, teach us about moral and physical bravery?
I'm glad that you put together the moral and physical courage component. I just read Courage Can Save Us by Ry Barkott, which is a great book. Ry's a Marine veteran who runs an organization called With Honor, and the book is profiling 10. I will answer your question, but first I'm going to tell you about Ry's book because it relates. Again, Ry's a Marine who wrote about 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, all of whom have served their country. I think 9 of them, have been in the military, and 1 in special in the FBI. And so I think that Ortiz really does have the moral and physical courage of someone who is a leader and who's, incredibly mature in the context of a battlefield. It was an unusual battlefield in the context he was operating because the Office of Strategic Services is, for anyone who's not familiar, I mean, Wild Bill Donovan, my co-author Nick is a OSS.
Yeah, it's the precursor, of course, to the CIA.
Yeah. So if you go into the CIA today, you walk, into the lobby at Langley. There's a giant bronze statue of Wild Bill Donovan. So he's sort of seen as the original spy master. But in a lot of ways, the OSS was a wartime startup. FDR would refer to Donovan as his secret legs, but they were also a Republican and a Democrat working together. So I think Peter Ortiz, again, was someone who would think more than you would expect someone to think in a moment of when bullets are flying at you. And that's what we see in the prologue of the book. We're situated in a pretty harrowing situation that feels incredibly life or death in, as the Germans are being forced out of France and are angry and on this murderous tear. And Ortiz finds himself at a moment of, decision that, I think to your question earlier of, is he a real thinker? It's like, yeah, but he was able to think while being shot at. And that, I think, is a big deal.
Well, certainly if you're going to be a Hollywood hero. You mentioned Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS. Could we compare and contrast somebody like Donovan with the founder of the FBI, the longtime FBI head, J. Edgar Hoover? Are they different types?
So they were both
officials.
They're incredibly different types. Obviously, things end differently for them in their own. And they both things probably don't play out the way they want them to. But I respect Donovan a lot more than I respect J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, not a lot of love lost between Wild Bill and J. Edgar.
Yes, but J. Edgar was actually considered for the same role, the head of the OSS, this fledgling, intelligence and special ops organization, and he was decided against. And I think in a lot of ways, the British SOE, actually, the special operations executive that Churchill had, mandated set Europe ablaze, was very much involved in the decision to have Donovan be at the helm. Roosevelt and Donovan had both gone to Columbia Law School, I believe. Donovan, just by virtue of graduating from law school, is clearly able to sit in a desk more than Ortiz was. But Donovan also pushed boundaries, defied orders. They said he could see an acorn and vision an oak tree. He referred to the OSS members, which at its peak was 13,000 military and civilian personnel. Those were the people like Ortiz are a very, very small subset. You have like Mo Berg, Catcher the Spy, you have Peter Ortiz, you have Virginia Hall, with their wooden leg trekking through the Pyrenees. But then you also have a lot of, back office people. You have a lot of Wall Street lawyers and bankers and cryptographers and cartographers. And yeah, Donovan, I think he also was told, don't go anywhere near D-Day. You are like the one guy who cannot land on D-Day. There's too many secrets in you. And of course, he's like sniffing around trying to get there on D-Day. And he's a World War I Medal of Honor winner or recipient. So
and he's got a great nickname. Why? Who wouldn't want to be called Wild Bill? You mentioned the SOE, which of course was the British equivalent to the OSS. It was also, if this is the right word, riddled with communist sympathizers and indeed people who ended up spying for Russia. They were romantics, I guess, in their own way. Was Ortiz ever, was he ever exposed, so to speak, to political idealism? Often this was developed during the Spanish Civil War. Was he sympathetic? What was his take on, I mean, obviously he didn't like the Nazis, and who does? And he was on the Western rather than the Eastern Front. But what were his thoughts about the Russians and the promise of communism?
I might answer this by reflecting on McCarthyism as something that he was kind of allergic to. So just to give you, he did not like infringement on people's, health, safety, and personal liberties. And he was, again, didn't like political targeting. I don't think he really liked politics. Again, wasn't there to ask him, nor did I get to ask my grandfather what he was like. But Peter Ortiz was someone who, I mean, his son will tell you Don Quixote was a guiding light for him. And I think that's that's not surprising. He was, philosophical, I think intellectual. I think I would have loved to, be able to ask him all these questions and have him give you much better answers. But yeah,
But in your book, in this new book, there's nothing of his politics. Then he certainly wasn't a man of the left.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could maybe just, I mean, he was in Hollywood after the war.
Although, of course, many leftists were in Hollywood after the war, and some were persecuted in the McCarthyite witch hunt.
Again, I think he was very defensive of people who were being persecuted in that context, and maybe even, wishes he had done more to, stand up to McCarthyism. So, I think, I mean, also when he was, after he got back from World War II and the war ends, he then goes sort of on a trip that we don't have much information about, but to look behind the Iron Curtain. And as he cites it, and you think, well, what was he doing there? But I think he was also working with the French Resistance. And you have to remember that the French Resistance is not, a line of formerly trained French army officers necessarily. There might be some in there who have run away from conscription and are trying to defend, France from the Nazis, or reclaim France from the Nazis, really. But there's also a bunch of derelicts and sort of people who have, escaped certain things and who are not like, or criminals. So I think he doing the right thing was like his, vantage point. And I think he had to work with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and try to get them all united in what he thought the right thing was.
Yeah, doing the right thing, of course, is an ideal. And I think that's one of the reasons why this book's going to do very well. We're all nostalgic for guys like Ortiz, who did the right thing. Remarkably romantic, heroic figure, Peter Ortiz. I wonder from the book, and in your thinking and writing about it, Katie, whether we could argue that Peter Ortiz was himself a product of his times. Last year, we had Brandon Webb on the show, a SEAL sniper, a heroic figure, but also a very complicated man. And he'd just written a book about his complicated relations with his kids.
Yeah.
I wonder whether, if Brandon Webb had been around the Second World War, he probably would have had a heroic narrative like Ortiz, and now it's a little more complicated. Do you think we are all, especially military figures, are products of the time? And if we if we're too nostalgic for figures like Ortiz in the Second World War, the greatest, so-called greatest, most heroic generation, we're not quite being truthful.
Yeah, so a couple different things. This is actually why I brought up Rad Barcott's book, about courage, because it's looking at this, and he actually opens with his father's experience in the military before him. And I think you do see, I recently interviewed Tom Hanks about World War II, his new docuseries for the History Channel. And obviously there's incredible nostalgia for the Greatest Generation. People eat it up. There's a reason that, these books keep selling. It's not that fun to read, these Afghanistan narratives, or more even from Vietnam. There's a reason why this category is larger, I think, in American book publishing culture, at least, because yes, we were operating from a time where there was not only existential but quite literal threat to Western democracy, and Americans from all backgrounds responded, coming together. I think, if anything, I think we need to remember that someone like Ortiz is great in any time, and maybe even especially important now. He was a hero who, you asked about his character before. For him, being a hero, without giving away too much in the book, I hope everyone, will pick it up and give it a chance. He was a hero who saw surrendering as, the right thing to do, and heroic in contexts where he didn't have to, but he felt that it was to the benefit of, he knew it was, would save more lives. And so I think that, I wouldn't make the comparison between just the landscape of American society today and that being, I think it's great that Tom Hanks is surfacing these stories. I love, Saving Private Ryan. I get what you're saying about, romanticizing it, but at the same time, I think we can all learn from standing up to fascism and making sacrifices that would go on to shape the rest of, not only our generation, but our kids' generations. And most of these people didn't talk about what they did. That's another, Greatest Generation trope that's true, because everyone was doing something, and, they kept on with their lives, and it was very, formative to their character. My grandfather was someone who dropped out of high school to help support his widowed mother, who had lost her two daughters. And then going into the military for him, it was formative, and it enabled him, again, a Jewish kid from Queens, to become a pilot that he would have never been able to, on the GI Bill, start a family and a business and buy a house. Am I saying that's the America we live in today and it's that simple? No. But at the same time, I think that we can still learn from, as my grandfather would call it, in his case, he saw it as the warm womb of Uncle Sam.
Yeah, you mentioned Spider-Man. Maybe the movie that most reflects our own ambivalence now about violence and heroism is The Odyssey. I don't know if you saw it, but
so I haven't seen it yet. But actually, someone got on with me the other day, me and Nick, and they said, I just want to say, I think that Peter Ortiz was like Odysseus, and then like kind of going on this whole thing. And I thought it was really interesting that they weren't bought into, Matt Damon or whoever.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Matt Damon, at least in the Odyssey, is presented as someone full of regret and sadness rather than, he is a heroic figure, but the heroism is it's presented in an apologetic way.
Right.
Katie, a few years ago, I had a novelist on the show, Christine Beck, who specializes in World War II novels. And she suggested that World War II, for writers like herself, for fiction writers, remains so seductive because it enables them to write about good and evil. Is that also true for this book? It's a nonfiction book, that it enabled you to write about good and evil? I'm not sure how much you write in Ortiz's War
a lot
about the Nazis and the evil, because to have on Ortiz, you also need Nazis.
Yeah, you need the stakes of, and you have, a couple days before Ortiz makes this, decision to surrender, he is clearly observing a town that has been leveled as a result of having people like himself pass through it. So yeah, I mean, you have, not only did I write about this, but I felt it. This is my grandfather's, what remained of his plane when it was shot down on May 6th.
Katie's waving a remarkable photo for people who are just listening, Katie. They may not be able to see.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a square.
You might describe the photo for our audio audience.
Of a forest in France where, these 8 American airmen who are coming, not with bombs, but with supplies really to drop to the resistance, were shot down. And so, yeah, I think it's very easy I think part of, I gravitate towards stories of resistance, probably in part because I'm a product of one. I was, one of my best friends is the granddaughter of the man who, before my grandfather got to Ortiz after this plane crashed, was shot down, took him into his home. He was a French man. He was a Bulgarian-born Jew living in France, who was, pretending to be Catholic and helping, people who he would have absolutely been killed for helping. He was already supposed to be dead. And so, Jacques Majar, you pulled up that photo earlier, he's an example of someone who, in the face of, I think it's not just good and evil, but it's what do you do when evil takes hold, right? And where do you find hope? And I think for me, I find hope in knowing that this man with his 8-month-old daughter and pregnant wife could still open his home to somebody who was going to make Nazis even more magnetically attracted to his house. So I think like it brings a lot of tensions, and I think she's right. It brings moments of decision. I also think it's interesting because there are some points where I was like, maybe I'll write a novel because I can just, I can have done the research, but paint it how I want to paint it. But ultimately for me with Ortiz, it's really important to have it be all true because, the truth is, this is something Tom Hanks said. He's like, sometimes like the truth is so crazy, you wouldn't even believe it. So if you made it a novel, you really wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, although coming back to the Baerwald book, The Fire Agent, it's about the moral complexity of his grandfather. It's an unbelievable story. His grandfather was German Jewish aristocrat.
Yeah, I wonder why
he was
he
working
made it
for
a novel.
IG Farben and did a deal with the Americans to get to America. He revealed a lot about Japanese cities, which enabled the firebombing of many of their great cities. He never seemed to quite get over it. Did what was Ortiz's relationship like with France? Did he have a particular? I mean, he was born in New York to an American mother and a French-born Spanish father. Did he think of himself? I mean, he obviously thought of himself as American, but did he have a special love of France?
He had a special love of the French Foreign Legion. And again, you think of the French Foreign Legion as if you're studying in the 1920s and 1930s, it was a place where you could go to reinvent yourself. Sometimes that meant you were a criminal. Sometimes it meant you were escaping your past. And Ortiz, again, he was like a beat to your own drum, quirky character in this sense, but he could also operate like he was a circus performer. He was a lion tamer, quite literally.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and again, that sort of speaks to that, like the thrill seek. Like you have to, be a little bit like amygdala is different than mine to have that be your profession. But again, it sort of all sounds made up. I think the French Foreign Legion had his heart because he said, it was tough, it was rough. I came to like it. I even came to love it. And that challenge is kind of like that Olympic athlete thing where you just like to get to he is kind of almost addicted to it. What's also really interesting is that, so again, in this culminating final World War II mission that really is the climax of the book, Operation Union 2, that's Ortiz. When Ortiz meets my grandpa, he's on a mission it's an inter-allied mission. There's Brits, there's French people. The second mission, Union 2, is his mission. He's leading for the OSS. He recruits Marines who he knows because they, were at Paris Island as his parachute instructor back when he showed up to boot camp as an enlisted Marine after having been in the French Foreign Legion and sort of blew them all away. So he meets these guys back in, again, 1944 OSS spaces in England, and he says, well, I'm going to go on this mission. You're jump trained. You know, he recruits them to do it with him. I bring this up because the one non-Marine he recruits for the 7-man mission is Francis Coolidge. And Francis Coolidge is also a, you know, blue-eyed, blue blood. He was a Harvard dropout who is the great-great-great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson. And what did Francis Coolidge do after he dropped out of Harvard? He went and joined the French Foreign Legion. So both of them, I think, saw the fight even more than like the love of France. It was like the love of what it stands for. The French Foreign Legion was also like, you know, sort of had a reputation for, all right, they take these like enlisted non-French people to be bossed around by French officers and to do the dirty work of, you know, maintaining the French Empire. But I think both Ortiz and Coolidge came to really, you know, become the soldiers or the warriors that they become in the French Foreign Legion, and that liberty, equality, brotherhood was a message that they both gravitated towards. Ortiz, you know, went back and spent time in France, I think, but I don't think he was like the, you know, a Francophile to the extreme, or like only, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, he was on the ground, so he saw both sides of France, the heroic side of the resistance, but also the many collaborators. Finally, we did a show with the great British historian Richard Overy. He's written many books about the Second World War, and the conversation in part was about whether the Second World War had ended with, of course, the war now in Ukraine, with the increasing hostility with Russia, with one kind of war or another preoccupying us. Do you think, in a sense, I mean, from this book, World War II still hasn't ended? And what does this kind of book do? Does it help close the door on World War II, or does it somehow keep it ajar?
I would like to think that Nick and my book will have that sweeping of an effect of, you know, systemically changing how people perceive history. I mean, I think the type of warfare that this book is chronicling is a type of warfare that's pretty uniquely World War II. And I think it's also another reason that you see a lot of these romantic portrayals. Again, World War II has a lot going for it in terms of like why the media gravitates towards it, why writers like myself find it so compelling. I mean, now it's like not as interesting to watch people like communicate on cell phones about, you know, like you think of the couriers, all of these like roles in World War II where there's, you know, the stakes are made very high by the, you know, technology of the time being the technology of the time. You have like the early radios, and you have, you know, carrier pigeons that are being dropped from the planes my grandfather was flying. They literally drop pigeons to, you know, bring messages. So things like that, like just, you know, drone warfare. I think we've closed the chapter of, just like World War I was trench warfare. Like that's not what we're looking at in World War II. I think what's really interesting about, like you brought up a Navy SEAL earlier, who, you know, the lineage of the Navy SEALs connects back exactly. I don't want to say his title, his name, Navy SEAL Webb, without
Brandon Webb.
Yes, there we go. But he, you know,
and he was a famous sniper as well as a Navy SEAL.
And their lineage does trace back to, you know, the OSS. And when you think of Special Operations Command today and MARSOC or whatever capabilities we have, you're looking at Wild Bill Donovan's vision for a group of Americans that comes together with these special, you know, skills and tactics. But I connect this to Ukraine because I was just in France with some Marines for the 82nd anniversary of Ortiz's Operation Union 2. And ironically and amazingly, these Marines were coming from Germany, where they're stationed, which, you know, doing a World War II thing with Marines from Germany and France is just like beautifully poetic. And one of them works, he's in the reserves, and he works for a nonprofit that helps basically deliver supplies to Ukraine via drones. And my grandfather, the one who I showed the picture of his crash, right, who was shot down, his plane was painted black to blend into the darkness, like he was a pilot on this hulking B-24 Liberator that is really hard to fly. We don't have to do that anymore, right? And I don't think we need to romanticize that. There's nothing romantic about, almost getting killed in a giant, hulking warbird. So Peter Ortiz rescues my grandpa in that moment, but you don't have that same story anymore. You have the story of drones. And so this friend, this Marine, was talking about how he thought it was really important to visit Ukraine. And he had just visited Ukraine and, is, again, a Marine who in his civilian life is working with this nonprofit to get aid to Ukraine. And I think just dropping aid from the sky, not just, but that it didn't have the same, it was worth it to go to take the risks that come with going to Ukraine for him to be able to see and connect with who he was helping. And so I just think we're entering a stage of how wars are fought that is, in some ways there are parallels, there's shadow wars, there's, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but there's also just a much bigger disconnect between the human element. In some cases, that's really great. I'm glad that we don't have to have as many pilots be shot down. And in other cases, I think we sort of forget what's happening and who's on the other side of it.
Well, maybe Second World War has ended, which is one good reason why you should pick up Ortiz's War, the remarkable true story of OSS saboteur Peter J. Ortiz. It's out today. It's co-written by my guest, Katie S. Sanders and Nicholas Reynolds, very distinguished war historian. Katie, congratulations on the book, and lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think you've done great credit, especially to your grandfather.
Oh, thanks so much, Andrew. I'm sure he and Ortiz would be kind of mortified that we're bringing the stories of, behind the scenes covert warfare into the spotlight. But I also think that's heroes don't brag, and that by illuminating what they do, we can, hopefully learn.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.